The information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Podcast with Dominic Frisby, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Hello and welcome to the Gold Money Podcast, hosted in association with Frisby's Bulls and Bears, with me, Dominic Frisby. It's a gorgeous autumnal Sunday evening in West London, and I'm sitting in a cafe on the Gloucester Road, and sitting opposite me is a good friend of mine. His name is Stratos Manolas, and he is a former bond trader, now a businessman, and he resides in the capital of the current financial crisis, which is, of course, Athens. And Stratos, I suppose it made sense. You're just on here for a couple of weeks. You're flying back to Athens tomorrow. It'd be really nice to kind of hear from the inside, as it were. What's life like in Athens? What's life like on the ground? How bad is the situation?
Hi, Dominic, and thanks for the invitation. Well, the way to answer this question is, I suppose, it depends on who you are, what is your income, whether you're employed or unemployed, and a lot of other reasons. Some people have been affected very badly from the crisis, especially the people with very low incomes and low pensions, that actually they have no choice, but they get what the state gives them, and they have no future. But a lot of other people that have properties, they have their own businesses, they accumulated wealth over the years, they probably have money abroad, and the crisis hasn't affected them as much.
Do a lot of Greeks have money abroad?
Some of them do have. I wouldn't say a lot, and there's been a lot of mythology about it, because a lot of people thinking of Greece, they think of ship owners, which is a tiny proportion of the population. Most of them have made the money internationally and not in the country anyways. Yeah. So a lot of the money that actually they made, they were made outside the country. Some people have moved the money outside Greece the last 3 years since the crisis started.
Because they're worried about banks?
Yes, and I can tell you, I think I read a figure of something like 120 billion. Well, I'm not sure, it could be like 100 to 120 billion left the country in the last 3 or 4 years. Now, since the last elections, which they were held in July, some 15, 20, 25 billion have come back. And there are two ways that people do it. First, there are people that have accounts abroad, and they just make a bank transfer. Very simply, there's a free movement of capital in the EU.
Yeah,
you're allowed to do it, no problem. And there are some other people that don't have this capacity to hold accounts, and they don't want to go through the hassle of opening one, and they just remove the money and put it into safes or under the beds.
Oh, really?
Yes, and these are the ones that the quickest to return the money back to the banking system when things stabilize a bit. So yes, it's been tough, and the toughest of all, I think, has been the level of unemployment. You have a country with 55% of youth unemployment.
Is it that high? 55%?
It is that high, and now I think the latest figures are they're talking about 25% of the overall unemployment for the whole population, adults and young people, and is what the future lies for them. Can you see a light in the end of the tunnel? Is the question everybody's asking. Is the program working, or why it hasn't worked so far? Or is there any agenda behind it? There are all sorts of stories, and people superstitious becoming. There's an agenda of the Germans, of all sorts of powers that are trying actually to take advantage of the situation, and all these things going on.
Presumably, the more people that get unemployed, the more obligations the government has, and then the higher its costs, the more difficult it is for a government to implement its so-called austerity plan.
It is, but I think for after a year or two, they reduce the amount of benefit they give to unemployed. I think for the first year, I'm not 100% correct, but I think it should be the case that you get probably 70% of your salary the first year, and then it's being reduced. And I'm not sure, actually, after a while, probably the state doesn't continue to give you, I'm not 100% sure about this, to be honest, Dominic.
So when you're walking through the streets of Athens, do you see are there more beggars than there used to be? Are there more people sleeping rough without homes?
Yeah, there are more beggars than 3-4 years ago. That's definitely the case. There are a lot of people that approach you and ask you for money. There is some hassle.
And are they always Greek, or are they often from somewhere else?
There are foreigners, because the country has another problem, which is illegal immigration. Being the first country in Europe, you get all these refugees coming from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from Syria now, and they're crossing the borders. And unfortunately, Turkey doesn't help. I mean, this is what one of the problems is, that actually you have boats coming from Turkey, and then you try to send them back, and Turkey doesn't accept them, so they stay in Greece. So you have a country that actually with a lot of financial problems, unemployment, political issues, and then it has illegal immigration of a magnitude that no other European country is experiencing at the moment. So they're trying to do something about it. It's a tough issue.
So this is one of the things that surprised me when we were talking earlier, Stratos, and that was the population of Greece. What is it?
Well, the population is the last a few years ago, when it happened, when they registered the population, was around 11 and a bit. So
11 million, obviously.
11 million, yeah.
Now that's surprisingly low. I thought it was going to be 30 or 40 million.
I think a lot of people think that Greece is a big country, but it's not. It's the size of Portugal, of Sweden, with a difference of a couple of millions, of Belgium.
Yeah.
Of Austria. Yes.
So how can such a small country have such a big impact?
It depends. It depends how you look at it. I mean, it can be a negative and positive impact. I mean, I suppose the negative impact of the last few years is the crisis and the contagion that crisis might create to the rest of the EU. Although having a small country with a very high debt, that issue was big, because then that might roll over to the other countries, and then the market can attack the bigger countries, etc., etc. So that was in the news, and that's why maybe people believe it's a big country, but it's not.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you described, when we were speaking earlier, you put the crisis into 3 categories, and you seem to think that this is more of a political and social crisis than it is an economic crisis. Why don't you explain what you mean by that?
I think since Greece entered the European Union in 1980, the political system believed that actually a bonanza was coming. And the parties that were in power, especially the socialists, I must say that, because that was the first time they came to power with a populist agenda, and they used all the subsidies and all the money of the EU to give it basically to workers, to farmers, to groups of the population, without sometimes checking where it was going. And the same applied to the EU themselves. They were giving money to these countries, and there were not really checks that actually what did you get back out of this actually money was spreading around.
Yeah.
And then they were borrowing the same time, and that created the big debt.
Yeah.
Corruption increased, unfortunately, with parts of the political system, with the unions. With the establishment of a lot of entrepreneurs that are doing business with the state, all this basic circle, all this group of elements, all these groups together created the crisis. So the institutions were not really working. I mean, there were cases, for example, of corruption, and it was very difficult to pursue the case up to the end. And sometimes they put it into the shelf, and you forget about it. So, all this political elite grew for 30, 40 years. And when suddenly the international crisis came, they were unprepared to deal with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was never, in my opinion, and I'm not the only one to believe that, it was never a problem of the country didn't have productive capacity or productive ability. The population is quite educated. A lot of the people have actually degrees, and quite high proportion internationally, and a lot of them with postgraduate degrees, with PhDs, a lot of research is being done, but you don't get the benefit. The country doesn't get the benefit of all that. For example, I mean, there's a research in one university about a new technology. How is it to start a business? How easy it has been to start a business based on that? Extremely difficult. You had to ask for this license, that license. It took ages. Sometimes people had to bribe
Yeah.
And so all that made it impossible to start, or very difficult to start a business. There was one entrepreneur actually that built these hotels in the area of south of Greece. And apparently the guy died recently. I mean, his dream came true eventually after 15, 20 years. He asked for 1,000 signatures from officials. And we're talking about a ship owner, a big entrepreneur with contacts. Even him, because the way the state operates, it is such that actually that you hit brick walls all the time. And it has nothing to do that actually, am I not the prime minister? It doesn't matter. You can hit it, you say, oh, that's what the law says, I'm sorry, it can take you a month, come back after a month, or you haven't done it properly. They find all sorts of excuses to delay you. And when you start an investment, for example, then you have all the people around them, the political parties of the left are saying, oh, we don't need that. We don't need like a big business or whatever. So they take you to the court for environmental reasons. So that delays another further year, a few years or months or whatever. So all these things have been happening the last 30, 40 years.
So, I mean, is there a movement to get rid of all that?
There's been a movement of, the old political parties say they changed. They try to get rid of the old people.
But I mean, it sounds a bit like the UK, where the party in charge changes, but the civil service stays the same.
I think it's worse there.
Oh, okay. No, but you know what I mean about the actual power is in the civil service, not in the, you know,
Well, the public sector, Dominic, is a big portion of the economy. For example, in a working population of 5.5 million, you have at the moment around 800,000 public workers, and a lot of them got their positions through the political elite. So the parties in power used to recruit them, and then they ended up being their voters. So you can see how the whole system was working. It was not a healthy system, and a lot of the productive capacity of the country had to go abroad or do much less than they could have done.
Yeah.
And the country suffer. I mean, of course, there are some healthy companies. Don't get me wrong. Entrepreneurship is very high in Greece. Everybody wants to become entrepreneur. I mean, people have ambitions, they have ideas. There are some healthy companies, even big, small and medium ones. But there are a lot of the other ones that actually survive because they're getting contracts from the state.
Yeah.
Which is not always a healthy.
No, I would say it's unhealthy.
It's very unhealthy.
Some people call it rent seeking.
Yeah, so when the Troika arrived, when the crisis 2010, they're trying to implement a program that did have obviously a lot of faults, because the first time they implemented such a big program.
Yeah.
But a lot of the reforms were absolutely necessary, and unfortunately, some of the political elite, because the program hasn't worked fully and created a lot of a big recession, a recession running for a few years with very high unemployment, they tried to blame the program as a whole. And this is the trick here. So the population are not happy with it. The political parties say, oh, that was a disaster. But parts of that program, especially the reforms, the country had to do themselves. They didn't have to ask for a program to implement it. They had to do it themselves, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And so this whole thing gets confused. The population gets confused about it. Do we like the program? No, we don't. But the program has some good elements. So it's a very tricky question. The whole issue is a very tricky question. If you ask my opinion, the program has very, very positive elements, but the way it was implemented from the beginning, especially with the pressure of the IMF, created a very big recession.
Okay. Now, is there a big movement to leave the euro, or do the Greeks want to stay in it?
Okay, 75% of the population in the last poll wanted to stay in the euro. And a lot of people are fearing going to drachma for many reasons. One of the main reason is that if you have your own currency, you have to manage it responsibly. And that hasn't been the case in the country for 30, 40 years when they had the drachma. And that meant continuous devaluations with the first excuse. So let's say you have like an industry is unproductive and you need to implement reforms like free labor movement, or like layoffs, easier layoffs, with the proper worker rights. We're not saying to go into the Middle Ages, rights, but to make it more flexible or whatever. You don't need to do that. You just devalue the currency for the time being, and we'll get over the bad period.
Okay.
So having your own currency, if you don't manage it properly and responsibly, that applies to every country, I'm sure. Then you don't gain out of it. So the euro gives an outside discipline. to some extent.
So why have you got? If you've got that outside discipline, why is Greece in the mess that it's in?
Because
because of all the subsidy and everything else.
No, because they entered the euro, they didn't do the reforms.
Okay.
Which is the ones that now they're trying to force in a short time.
Yeah.
So now that the whole thing has, the whole crisis is out of proportion, they tried to do the reforms that could have been done when things were much better and the economy was growing, and they didn't.
What's your prediction? How is it going to go?
Okay, my prediction is the following. I think they probably just make it into the euro. I think they're probably going to stay in the euro. There are risks on the way.
We've suddenly had a meeting of gentlemen right next to us, so sorry about the noise, but anyway, carry on.
I think they will stay in the euro. It's going to be hard. I think the trick here is the government is in power at the moment. It's a government of three parties. If they stay for a longer time and they implement fully what they say they will, you might see some good things coming out of Greece, and especially investment opportunities for a lot of foreign investors, and you see probably unemployment coming down. Now the risk, as I said, is the political risk. The people get fed up. Members of the parties in power, they can't take the difficult decisions they're voting for, and they bring the government down. That's the risk I see.
Okay.
Yeah, and on the other hand, the good thing is that in the EU at the moment, the leadership of the EU, which was Mr. Hollande, and I think also Germany is changing their attitude. They want to make this work now, and they don't want to play around, with the problems they had so far. They want to put the institutions right. I'm not saying it's an easy thing, and a lot of people disagree they're going to succeed. But I think the cost of tearing apart this project is much higher than trying to keep it together for everybody involved.
Okay, so if I could sum up what you just said, I would sum it up with the words muddle through. Would you agree with that?
I think you're right, Dominic.
Okay. When you're unsure, I suppose muddle through is often a good prediction to make. So my last question to you, we had Dave Skarica on the show a couple of weeks ago, and Dave was saying that, that over the summer he'd been buying Greece, and could find arguments to justify buying the Greek stock market. Would you agree with that? Or?
Yes, I can tell you something that happened the last few weeks. The Greek debt has been doubled in price because of the more positive sort of news coming out of the country. Mrs. Merkel came to Greece like a few days ago. That was unthinkable.
You mean yields have fallen?
The price of the bonds, let's say, was 15 cents to the euro. And now it's 28, I think.
Okay.
27, depending on the maturity. Now, there are hedge funds, there are some of them American hedge funds, that in the summer, when everybody thought that actually the leftist party became second in the elections, they might come first, and they might actually lead into Greece leaving the euro, or the other partners want Greece just to go and leave them alone, basically. They were buying at the time, taking a huge risk. I mean, I don't know the details. They must have doubled actually their money. So a lot of people have made money. The stock market has rallied in the back of the good news, also of the mergers between the banks. So the country had five big banks. Now they're coming down to 3.
So that's brought some solidity.
Yeah, the stabilizing. It's better for the depositors. So not many people would like to flee the money and take them out because they're going to be stronger. The banks are about to be recapitalized by the program. By the money coming from under the program. So yes, obviously be careful on the way. Monitor the situation, but I've seen myself some private projects actually starting being implemented. I've been dormant for a few years, so they look positive, but there are obstacles on the way. But yeah, it looks much better than a few months ago.
There you go. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. Stratos, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and you've given an excellent interview. And listen, thank you very much for doing that. You don't write a report, or you don't want people getting in touch with you? Do you want to? Is there, if people want to, is there a way they can, or do you want to?
Well, I can give them my old business email, which sometimes I sort of communicate with people. This is I spell it is Stratos Stratos @ actioninvest.com.
There we go.
AXION.
A-X-I-O-N
invest.com.
Okay, great. I'll put a link. Well, I won't put a link because loads of people you'll get emails from robots. But it's stratosm@axioninvest.com. There we go.
Thanks very much, Dominic, for having me.
My pleasure, Stratos Manolas. Thank you very much.
Subscribe to the Gold Money newsletter at www.goldmoney.com to receive email updates on new articles, videos, and iTunes podcasts from our gold research section.
That actually they have no choice, but they get what the state gives them, and they have no future. But a lot of other people that have properties, they have their own businesses, they accumulated wealth over the years, they probably have money abroad, and the crisis hasn't affected them as much.
Do a lot of Greeks have money abroad?
Some of them do have. I wouldn't say a lot, and there's been a lot of mythology about it, because a lot of people thinking of Greece, they think of ship owners, which is a tiny proportion of the population. Most of them have made the money internationally and not in the country anyways. Yeah. So a lot of the money that actually they made, they were made outside the country. Some people have moved the money outside Greece the last 3 years since the crisis started.
Because they're worried about banks.
Yes, and I can tell you, I think I read a figure of something like 120 billion. Well, I'm not sure, it could be like 100 to 120 billion left the country in the last 3 or 4 years. Now, since the last elections, which they were held in July, some 15, 20, 25 billion have come back. And there are two ways that people do it. First, there are people that have accounts abroad, and they just make a bank transfer. Very simply, there's a free movement of capital in the EU.
Yeah,
you're allowed to do it, no problem. And there are some other people that don't have this capacity to hold accounts, and they don't want to go through the hassle of opening one.
The information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Podcast with Dominic Frisby, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Hello and welcome to the Gold Money Podcast, hosted in association with Frisby's Bulls and Bears, with me, Dominic Frisby. It's a gorgeous autumnal Sunday evening in West London, and I'm sitting in a cafe on the Gloucester Road, and sitting opposite me is a good friend of mine. His name is Stratos Manolas, and he is a former bond trader, now a businessman.
And they just removed the money and put into safes or under the beds.
Oh, really?
Yes, and these are the ones that the quickest to return the money back to the banking system when things stabilize a bit. So yes, it's been tough, and the toughest of all, I think, has been the level of unemployment. You have a country with 55% of youth unemployment.
Is it that high? 55%?
It is that high, and now I think the latest figures are. They're talking about 25% of the overall unemployment for the whole population, adults and young people, and is what the future lies for them. Can you see a light in the end of the tunnel? Is the question everybody's asking. Is the program?
He resides in the capital of the current financial crisis, which is, of course, Athens. And Stratos, I suppose it made sense. You're just on here for a couple of weeks. You're flying back to Athens tomorrow. It'd be really nice to kind of hear from the inside, as it were. What's life like in Athens? What's life like on the ground? How bad is the situation?
Hi, Dominic, and thanks for the invitation. Well, the way to answer this question is, I suppose, it depends on who you are, what is your income, whether you're employed or unemployed, and a lot of other reasons. Some people have been affected very badly from the crisis, especially the people with very low incomes and low pensions.